Hello everybody, this is a re-recording of the Tuesday session. Hopefully it goes better this time. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Okay, so let's get stuck in. So I'm just creating a new third person game, and I'm just going to pop it in my Unreal folder here. Just call it Integers 5. The other thing that we want to do once we've created our project is to add the stylized nature pack to our project. Lovely. So that's been created and opened up, and you should see that we now have the stylized PBR nature pack as a folder in here. So now we have the PBR nature pack here, and you'll see it has a foliage folder, which has the assets, the foliage types, the materials, and the textures. We've got a map with an example scene in it. And you can use, feel free to use this example scene if your preference isn't to create a scene yourself. This is completely valid. What you're doing in this sprint is showing off the more tech art area of the art side. So, it's really about the materials that we're making and the things that we're doing in the scene, rather than building up something beautiful yourself. Depending on where you want to end up, you might be required to do different things as a technical artist. If you're in a larger studio, you might find that you have an environment art team, and they'll be the ones sort of creating this scene for you. And then, you take their assets and, add an interesting material to it, or do something to the asset that is more technical. So using an example scene, using a scene from the asset store, anything that you like, that's totally valid. But equally, you might work at a place where you are an artist, a generalized artist, and you just want to be able to do a little bit more of the technical side. So if you want to create your own scene, absolutely, please do feel free and inspired to do so. This is taking a little while to load. It's the first load. Everything's it's figuring it all out, really. Here we are. Oh, hello. Great. So we've got a really fun scene going on here. It's quite massive. There's some interesting stuff. Very mirrored water material, so there's another thing that might be fun to have a little look at. Make the water something that you might want to create yourself. Lovely. So here's the scene. We've got landscape, we've got all these rocks, we've got foliage painted around. I'm just going to create a new scene now, just to show you a few of those things, how you would do it from scratch. Again, this isn't intended to be a make your first scene in Unreal, so I'll go over it, but I won't go super in depth into these things. If you'd like to sort of dive into this further, we can hopefully find some materials. If you want to just pop a question in Discord, I'm sure we can find something specific to what you're wanting to do. So I'm just going to remove the floor and go to the landscape mode up the top here. And just to start, we're just going to create a new one with all of the defaults. Strange default setup here. There's a lovely quick start Unreal Landscape guide this goes through, you know, creating a new landscape. It goes through sculpting it and all sorts. So I'll do a brief overview here, but please use this if you want to dive deeper into it all. So we are going to create our landscape. I'm going to change this to 512. And I'm just going to click the create button. Great, so now we just have what looks like a plane, but you'll see here by default we've got this brush. If we start painting, we can start doing some fun stuff. We can also just throw some noise on here, just make it a little bit lumpy. Or the other option that you can do, if I was to delete this landscape and start again, we can import a landscape from a file. There are a few ways to generate a landscape file. It's basically just a height map texture. I'll link a video, one way that I saw that was using LiDAR data in Houdini. There's lots of terrain software out there that again is a little bit beyond what we're going to be doing here. So if I just click import here, there we are, you'll see a landscape texture that I created earlier. So yeah, there's a few ways to do it depending on what you want to achieve. I'll link the import videos on Discord. There's a few caveats that you just have to do with it. I used Houdini because that's my go-to, but it really depends if you've used World Machine or Gaia before. Do feel free to use that. Houdini Apprentice does have a few limitations on export sizes and texture sizes, so it's not the best if you don't have an indie license, but it's my go-to because it's the thing that I use the most. So we have a landscape now. Now I want to have a little look at the landscape material and landscape textures. So rather than starting by diving into the existing landscape material, I think it's best if I start by creating a new landscape material. So let's do that. Let's go landscape _ demo. Right, so here's our materials. So at the moment, pretty blank. If we just set a really obvious base color and apply this, then what we're going to do is right click and create material instance. If you used other softwares, you might sort of think of the name material that's used in Unreal is I guess kind of similar to a shader, but the material plugs into a lighting model. So the shader is kind of the material and the lighting model bit, whereas a material instance is kind of all of the things that we can change about the material, so that if we want to use the material for lots of different things, we can use a material instance. So I've just made a material instance of that landscape. So if I open up this, you see it parents to that landscape material. There's nothing else going on here yet. So we're going to go back to the landscape, and we're going to just apply this material instance to our landscape. Now everything's blue. But that's probably not what we want. We probably want to paint, we want to paint grass, we want to paint rocks and stuff on this terrain. Now there is a paint column here, but if I do it right now, you see nothing paints, and that's because we've got no layers. So what we're going to do is we're going to add, we're going to create a couple of layers. And I'm going to call this grass demo. And you'll see there's no layer info here. This thing here is looking for a layer info. So we're going to press this little plus button here and create a weight blended layer. And then what we'll do is under stylized PBR nature, terrain, we'll make a new folder and we'll call this so now we have this thing called grass demo layer info, and if I open that up, we have a layer name. You can also plug in a texture here, so I might just grab one of those grass textures. That is a terrain texture, so I'm just going to borrow that. Cool. And then I might just pop one other layer into here. So we're going to add a new layer. And let's just call this one rock demo. And again, we're going to add a new layer info. And same again, I'm just going to plug in the rock. Right, so now we can actually paint this information, but you'll see that nothing's actually changing. And that's because we need to connect this sort of layer info that we have here that is painting different, it's basically sort of painting to a splat map, which is a texture, like a top-down texture that says like grass is like a certain color, rock is a certain color, and it paints to those. And then we take that information and into our material, we blend that information together. So Unreal has a lovely node that already does this for us. It's called Landscape Layer Blend. And you see when I plop it down, there's nothing going on in here, and that's because we need to add these layers manually here. So here, if I add a layer, we want to call the layer name the same as we have here. And then add another one. And call it rock. We'll plug that into base color. And what we'll do is we'll plug into here the grass texture and the rock texture. So I'm just going to plonk down 2 texture samples. I'm just going to find that grass again. I'm just going to find that rock. Now you'll see where I did put my paintbrush down and paint grass, now grass appears. And similar if I do that for rock. Lovely. So what you could do now is sort of go around and paint your terrain. I am lazy though, so I'm going to actually figure out if I can just use rules to figure out where to put grass and where to put rock. So this layer blend connects directly with the painted layers that we do here. But I'm going to ignore that for now and just think about how to blend these 2 textures together. And I guess the rule set that if you think about it like you'd want here is, I guess, I want grass where the land is quite flat. And I want rock where the land is quite steep. So I need to figure out a way to sort of mask by steepness. And that is where the dot product comes in. Before I do the dot product, I'm just going to pop down a lerp node. So a lerp node is kind of like a mix node if you've used Substance. It basically just like, blends 2 values together. You've got this alpha value here, so you could blend 2 values together based on a mask. So in this case, I'm going to use the dot product as a mask. So the dot product gives us a value that kind of tells us how much of a vector B is projected onto a vector A. Or I guess you could say like how much a vector B is similar to vector A. The way you calculate it is just by multiplying the individual components together. So you multiply the x of A by the x of B, and the y of, and then add the y of A to the y of B. And obviously, if you're in 3D space, you add the z of A multiplied by the z of B. What this is really useful for doing is it sort of gives us this relationship between these two vectors. So if both vectors are pointing the same way, the value that we're going to get back is 1. If vector A and B are perpendicular to each other, we're going to get a value of 0 back. And if A and B are in the same direction, but they're complete opposites, we're just going to get a value of -1. And so this is a really nice way of basically just figuring out how much of a vector or how close a vector is aligned to the vector that I care about. So going back to the context of what we're doing in Unreal, what I want to understand is the normal of my mesh. I want to understand how closely that normal aligns with, in this case, up. Because if you think about our lovely terrain here, if you sort of imagine the normals around here, where we've kind of got rolling hills and bits, our up vector, our normals are mostly pointing up. There's a slight gradient with it, but they're mostly pointing up. Where we've got cliff, they are very much pointing sideways, which is our 0. And nowhere does the terrain actually point downwards. So let's plug in the result of that dot product into base color. So what we kind of get here, I'm going to put it in on lit mode, is we get white where our normal mostly points up. We get black where our normal mostly points sideways or further down. And then we get a sort of gradient in between. So if we plug this into here, what we're going to get is where our value of our dot product is 0, it's going to give us grass. So at the moment it's going to give us grass on the cliffs, and where the value is 1, it'll give us rock. So this is actually the wrong way around, so I'm just going to swizzle these. I'm just going to delete this for now. So if I plug this in, we're now seeing that our cliffs kind of have rock just added to them by default, and our grass is everywhere that it's flat. Obviously, we don't actually want grass here on the ground here, depending on what that is. For me, actually, in this height map that I've loaded in, this is actually the seabed floor. So I don't want grass here. So what I might want to do after that is mask by height as well, so that I mask that out. But the other thing is, perhaps I want a little bit more control over how much grass is shown where that normal is kind of blending down. And so this is where we can sort of play around with some numbers just in general maths form. So a lot of the time I use this software called, not software, a website called GraphToy. And what it does is it lets me plot graphs. So at the moment I'm just doing y equals x. So as we go along x, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, y is equal to the same value. But I can sort of play around with this value, like y equals x squared gives me actually kind of an interesting curve here, and y equals x to the half gives me sort of a curve in the other way around. So what I might want to do is kind of like use the power function to like allow me to sort of alter how my gradient is working. So in our material here, after we do our dot product, just going to saturate, which basically clamps it between 0 and 1. And then let's do a power. And what we're going to do is we're going to convert this to a parameter. I'm going to call this power. And so now if we apply this, I should set the default to 1. In our material instance, you'll see here that we now have a grass slope power parameter, and so we can play around with this, and that alters how the grass sort of blends between the two things. So that's always a nice one to use when you're trying to mask things. You could also throw in cheap contrast as well. And again, convert to a material parameter, and now we have a parameter in here. So now I can play around with that contrast, and that sort of like de-blurs the edges a little. Now this is just like one sort of level of blend, but you might want to blend a couple of things together. You might even want to blend with the painted layers as well. So yeah, you can play around like mixing sort of blends together. You might even want to blend by height. There's loads you can do here. I just wanted to give you an example of a way that you can sort of procedurally define things with a little bit of maths. Yeah, just to sort of touch the surface. And allow your imaginations to run wild and dive deeper. One thing I do want to point out here is that all we are doing here is we are just blending the visuals. If you remember when we set up this these layer info files, they had this concept of like a physical material here, and they had some extra data. We're not actually like using that here. This is just purely physical, purely visual. If we did want to blend physical materials, there is a landscape physical material output node. We kind of want to plop some grass around the place. There are a few ways that you can do this. You could use PCG if you're that way inclined. I wish I could do a whole sprint on PCG because procedural stuff is brilliant. But Unreal has some like landscape or foliage tools already. It has this lovely little foliage mode at the top here. And what you get is a little brush. So you can add some foliage here. So we could add this SM grass here. And we could paint. You can just sort of paint grass around. There we go. But again, we do know where we want grass to be. we want grass to be everywhere that we're using the grass, where we have the grass texture. So our landscape demo texture also gives us this lovely output node called landscape grass output. So here, again, we have to set up a grass type and link it through. So there isn't a grass type set up at the moment. So we're going to create one. So we create a landscape grass type. We'll call it grass 01. So in the landscape grass type, we'll pop our static mesh in there. You'll see there's a lot of settings here for like density and the way that it scatters and such. For now, we'll just leave it all at default. You can play around with that as you like. And then if we go back to the landscape demo, now our grass 01 landscape type exists in there, or grass type, sorry. And if we press save, nothing happens, because I guess it's that same weird thing that was happening before. If I like reapply it. Yep, now you can see grass goes everywhere. So the way to think about this value that we're plugging in here, it's per pixel. So I'm setting that value of 1 for like every pixel. So sort of imagine like the height map. We have a texture basically the same as the height map. And here we're putting 1 in for every single pixel. And up here is where we're plugging in either grass or cliff for every pixel. So to choose where we actually put grass, we can use the same mask that we used up here. So if we plug that in, and then reapply this. I hope this isn't happening to all of you. It hasn't been happening to me, but I'm not sure why. Let's press save to that. Now you'll see our grass is only being scattered where we have green, and where we have rock, we are not getting grass scattered. So again, it's a nice little system. You can kind of like tie all these things together so that you're not having to do all of these bits manually. You can set up a nice tool set, you can set up some nice rules, and it's a nice little setup.